Today we are continuing our 3-year Bible class through the Bible, starting with Genesis, but we're in chapter 3 today, beginning in chapter 3 today of Genesis. So we will spend 3 years going through the Bible from the beginning to end, every verse. I need more? Take it off? Can you hear me now? You can hear me better? That's good. I'm glad. So we're talking about Noah and the ark today. And I know you know the story, so bear with me, but there may be some things in here you've never heard before, some things you probably never talked about. Genesis chapter 5 through 10 tells the story of God starting over again. Now, I had a lot of pictures of the ark I could have used. I mean, there are tons of pictures of the ark if you go out there and try to find them on the net. But I found this one, and I liked it for a particular reason. Look in the upper left-hand corner. And there's a little tiny animal there. He's already off, and he's gallivanting around. Do you see the little animal that I'm talking about? Very little animal. Well, here, I'll highlight it for you so you can see it better. An Arkansas Razorback. Guys, we made it on the ark. We did. I mean, that's a hog with a tusk. That kind of makes an Arkansas Razorback. I don't know if you know this or not, but ABC did a poll recently, and 6 out of 10 people believe in the truth of the stories that they read in the Old Testament. 6 out of 10 of them have no trouble at all believing that Noah was really a character, that really there was a Moses, and everything else, they believe it. 6 out of 10. That surprised me. I didn't expect it to be that big, right? But the number jumps to about 9 out of 10 among evangelical Protestants. I guess that would include us. And we take these stories to be true. Well, you have 3 choices whenever you read a story in here that comes in conflict with what science is saying. And really, we started the first week talking about science and the Bible and how to reconcile the two. Anytime there's a conflict with what science says and what the Bible says, what do? Well, you have 3 options. The first option is you can choose to go with the Bible's version and say science doesn't know what it's talking about. That's kind of a dangerous position to take sometimes because science really does know a lot about what they're talking about. But they make mistakes from time to time, no doubt. The second choice would be to pick science and say the Bible is just a book. It's somebody wrote it. It's not true. It's not literal. It's not history. And then, of course, the third and more proper way to do it is find a way to reconcile the two. And I believe that we need to do that. We need to reconcile what science is saying with what the Bible says. Otherwise, our children are going to go to school, and they're going to come into that biology class, and they're going to come home with a lot of questions to you, and you're going to have to answer those questions for them. Do I take what science is saying? Do I take what the Bible's saying, Mom? Well, find a way to see that the Bible is saying the same thing, maybe in different languages. In this case, we're talking about Hebrew, Greek, and English, and the language of math. What it boils down to, the language of science. God gave us the ability to know. The word science really means scientia potentia est. You know what the word potentia means? Power. Science is giving us knowledge that we can use to power our way through this world. Science is knowledge. The more we learn about the universe, the more compelled we will believe in an all-powerful God. I'm convinced of that. So I would encourage your children and grandchildren to embrace all aspects of science. Learn everything they can about this universe because it will not challenge their belief in the Bible. You can find a way to understand that what we're hearing out there in science reconciles. And I believe that to be very true. Well, how many generations did it take before Adam and Eve came on the scene and the world got completely corrupt? 100 generations, 200, 1,000 generations? No. 10 generations. 10 generations from the time of Adam, the world was totally, morally bankrupt. Do you think God knew this would be the outcome? What do you think? Did God know that in 10 generations everybody is going to abandon him? Well, if he's omniscient, he would know that. You think the devil knew that in 10 generations I'm going to be successful? Everybody on earth is going to get wiped away because they will be so evil they're not going to be pleasing God anymore. Do you think the devil knew? I personally don't think the devil knew. I don't think the devil knows everything that God knows. I think there's some things he doesn't know, and probably he didn't know this. What I don't know is after the flood, 10 generations later, that evil pervaded everything just like it does. So why in the world are we still here? Why did God give us second chance? God said, I regret that I made them. He did. But he started over again. I know that 2,000 years ago, God didn't wipe us away. Instead, he came back to earth and he died for us, each of us sinners, 2,000 years ago. And he will not force us to obey him, and he weeps when we don't obey him. All of us at that point will face the consequences, of course, and it's our choice, not his. You know, Methuselah lived a long time, right? He was the oldest man recorded in the Bible. He lived a few years older than me, 969 years. But do you know how he died? You know why he died? Well, I do. I'll show you. The reason was he couldn't swim. Methuselah could not keep up with the tide. He couldn't swim. And here's what I mean by that. If you look at Adam and Eve and all their children, see all the dates there that follow in the line of Seth. We're talking about the godly line of Seth. And Seth's children are listed, their children, and so forth. Eventually you come to Methuselah. And Methuselah lived 969 years. Do you know what happened the year he died? Guess. What do you think? The flood. Thank you. I have my glasses on because I can't quite see you, but I think you said flood. I'll give you the credit for that one anyway. He died just before the flood, or some say he died in the flood. Can you imagine? Methuselah had his end because he couldn't swim. So, God sees wickedness in the world. He saw the sons of God, and they saw the daughters of humans, and they thought they were beautiful, and they married them. Who were the sons of God? The daughters of humans. And their children were the Nephilim. Do you know who the Nephilim were? Well, hang on a few minutes, you'll know. The sons of God were, some people say, and there's probably 3 or 4 ways to look at it, but the godly men of Seth, right? The generation that followed through the line of Seth and carried on. We saw that line that's strung at the bottom. That's the line of Seth, and it was considered the godly line. That's the content of the chapters 4, 5, and 6. And then chapter 6 describes God's decision to wipe away everything from the earth and start all over again. The chapters that follow that describe the wickedness that overcame the world, and then that led up to the flood. So the sons of God possibly could be angels, right? Sometimes you hear the sons of God that we talked about there were angels. Angels who had offspring with women. And that would lead credence to the idea that they created giants, people who were so strong and so capable and so able that they were considered huge people, the Nephilim. The problem I have with this, though, and everybody else does, is if you read about it, other verses tell us that angels are sexless. They're not male, they're not female. They are something in between the two. But they can appear like males, there's no doubt about it. We see male angels talking, but still they're sexless. So how could they have children? There's so many questions that are, believe me, when we get to heaven, we've got all our questions lined out here. We're going to start asking God's questions to get answers to these. This is one of those. Who were the sons of God? And then there's a third choice. Some people say the sons of God were simply the nobles and aristocrats and kings that lived on the earth at the time that the children of Seth lived, and they intermarried with Seth's line, and that created the problems with sin and polygamy and so forth. Those who were subservient to these people called them gods, called them the Elohim, which is a word that we use for God. The sin that God could not overlook, though, was polygamy. The choice men made to obey other gods than one true God, really, that's polygamy. And their mighty offspring would be strong in violence and just as strong in tyranny. So, we don't know who these sons of God were, but we do know about the story, the flood. We all know the story, the flannel strips. Remember when you were in this high and you were in class and your Miss Martha was teaching your class, you put flannel strips up there. And here were the 8 people who got to ride on the flood, got to go in that water ride at the theme park. Many nations have their own versions of an earthwide flood, though, not just the Hebrews. Let me give you a handful of them. Mesopotamia. the Hinduism, the Buddhists, the Chinese, the Greeks. The Greeks have a god, Deucalion. I never can pronounce this right. Deucalion and Pyrrha. They were Noah and his wife, and they had a flood that Zeus caused, if you can believe it. In Norse mythology, in the Quran, in the Irish mythology, in Hawaii, and Australian Aborigines in South America. I mean, there are just a handful of nations that all have some kind of flood story in their past. The one that we have comes from the Hebrews. And we know the story of the flood. Well, I got to wondering how big this ark was, if it's going to hold all these animals, right? A whole bunch of animals, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But Noah's Ark, if drawn to scale, would look something like this, compared with something you may be familiar with that was very advanced in the 1950s, the end of the 50s, the USS Independence. And then it carried on into the Vietnam War. I don't think it's in operation anymore, but this is how big it was compared with Noah's Ark. It wasn't that big. It wasn't as big as a naval carrier. In fact, it was about half the size of that. Half as long, about a third as wide as that big carrier, and just about as tall. At this time, though, 10 generations from Adam, the world is completely bad, and God needed to erase that. It says that wickedness was everywhere. No one told the truth. Everyone lied. Can you imagine how hard it would be to do any kind of work in this world if everybody lied? If no one told the truth? And that's kind of the nature of the thing that they were in at that point in time. You couldn't have good communication. You'd have hatred, not cooperation, selfishness instead of selflessness. How bad must it have been at that time? And folks, they didn't even have the internet. It must have been terribly, terribly bad. Now, compare Noah with other people who have faced other things. Jesus tells us about the end of the world and the day of the Lord that's coming. And in those cases, he's telling us that we are not going to be aware. And the rest of the world was not aware. They weren't prepared. But Noah was prepared. Can we be prepared for the end of the world? Sure we can. If we read this thing from beginning to end, we'll understand exactly how to be prepared. And God wants us to be prepared. He doesn't want us to be a Noah or the people who were with Noah at that point in time. We need to be prepared like Noah was. Now, it's always interesting to me to know, I mentioned all of those other cultures that have a Noah story, but the Gilgamesh in the Sumerian language was one that's very interesting. It's a story that's very much like the story of Noah. The question I have is, the Sumerians came before Noah. Did Noah know about the Gilgamesh myth? Or if he came later, did the others know about Noah and they stole it from them? Well, some people believe it was one way or the other, but no one really knows for sure. But nonetheless, God chose Noah. How did Noah find favor with God? What was he doing or not doing? The world was exceedingly evil, but Noah found favor with God. He and his family, do you think they were the only family in this whole existence, in this whole world, who were doing good? I kind of believe they are, simply because if there were other people out there who were just as good as Noah, what happened to them? Did they get to hitch a ride on this boat? Their ticket was thrown away, and they died with all the rest of the bad people. So I don't know. I'm going to ask that question, I think, not maybe at first, but when I get there, I'll ask and find the answer to that. Well, God told Noah to build the ark. Not only that, but God gave them the ability. Now, ability doesn't mean just knowledge. I could have knowledge to do something and not the skill to do it. So he gave them the ability and the skill to be boat makers. And that's what he and his children did for quite a few days or even years. It was 50 feet tall. How tall is 50 feet? Well, if you go to anywhere in California, you're going to come around and you see the Hollywood sign, right? Those letters in Hollywood, Holloy, all of those are 50 feet tall. That's how tall it was. It was the most common extension cord you have in your house, 50 feet. A typical garden hose, 50 feet. That's about how long or how tall this ark was, 50 feet, about the extent of all of your garden hose. if it's not one of those 100-foot variety of garden hoses. It was 450 feet long. Now, that's about the size of one football field from edge to edge, including the end goals and everything else there. The floor part of the stadium would be about the length of Noah's Ark. 62 cars could fit bumper to bumper, and 3 of NASA's space shuttles could be lined up nose to tail to make that distance. That's how much we're talking about here in the Ark. And it was 75 feet wide, wider than it was tall, so it was stable in the water. It would allow about 2.5 Greyhound buses to be parked nose to nose all the way, inside the hull of that thing. You could take the Statue of Liberty, cut it into 2 pieces. You could put half of it in there and the other half right beside it. They would have fit down in the hull of that. That's how big this thing was. Does that help you get an idea now of what we're talking about when we say Noah's Ark? It kind of did me. It gave me a better picture of what we're talking about. Here's a question. It's a quiz for you. I want to see how much you really know. Was Noah a Jew? Was Noah a Jew? No, you're saying no, right? He came way before Abraham, right? He came way before the time that people were called Jews. He was not a Jew. But Moses, who wrote this, was a Jew, wasn't he? Every picture you've ever seen of Noah shows 2 animals coming into the ark, male and a female of every kind of animal. 2 zebras, 2 storks, 2 monkeys, 2 elephants, you name it. They were going up the thing I showed you earlier, the picture, was 2 animals side by side, right? Is that how it went in? It's not, Charles? You were there. So go ahead and tell us how many animals went in. 17? 7 pairs, so that would be 14, right? I never learned that in class. I was always taught he took them in male and female because it talks about pairs here, but that is one of my questions here. I'm sorry, you must have you snuck in and read my life. Yeah, how did he know what was clean and what was unclean? God certainly could have told him, here are the animals to take on the ark. Noah may not have even known that God considered them clean. We don't know. Moses understood it though, and Moses knew the animals that were going in the ark, and he was saying God told him to take 7 of the clean and only 2 pairs of the unclean. I think that's right. I'll get it right here in just a minute. Anyway, there were 14 pairs that would go in. Now, what about as a kind? Because here's the thing. He said take them of each kind. He didn't have to take a leopard and a lion. Why? A leopard and a lion are one kind, right? All he had to take was one or the other of them and we're good. On horses, he didn't have to, well, I shouldn't go there. He didn't need a zebra and a horse, for instance, because that's a kind of animal. Really, they went in by kind and not by species, which kind of helps a little bit, talking about how many animals were there. Did they take fish on the ark? Did they have goldfish in little bowls? No. The fish were already in the water, right? They could make it through the flood, I suppose. Some fish could. I don't know how much fresh water that would have been, but anyway, I won't go there. Where did all this water come from? The Bible says the springs deep in the earth came forth, and the heavens were opened, and water came down and rained for 40 days and nights. And the water stayed on the earth for 150 days. And after that, the water receded. Where did the water go? Are there pockets of place underneath the earth that could hold that much water, or did it evaporate quickly? Well, science would tell you that the earth could not have been covered to the extent that Moses painted a picture in this chapter. But recent research is, and it's becoming respectable now to think that at one point in time in the development of the earth, way back in one of those Paleozoic periods or even before that, the earth may have been totally covered with water. You could not have seen any of the land. It wasn't until the forces underneath there started pushing land up that you even had land up there. So at one point in time, the earth may have been covered with water, but not to the extent I think that Moses said it was. In 1959, aerial photography was taken of an odd structure on Mount Ararat in northeast Turkey. And these pictures found their way into the Life magazine. You talk about a stir, because what does that look like, folks? Looks like a big footprint to me, but it also looks like a boat. Looks like the outline of a boat. Here, I'll make it clearer for you. People saw that and they thought, wow, we found Noah's Ark and it's up on top of Mount Ararat. But I went to Scopes.com. Anytime someone tells you something that's too much to believe, go check it out on Scopes, because they will do the fact-checking and tell you the truth. These were caused by natural geologic formations, not by anything human-made. They have done all kinds of surveys, top and bottom, underground, above ground, looking for iron, looking for metal, looking for wood. They have found no clues of any kind like that. Simply, the earth created those things that pushed up in that formation. God made us a promise, though. He said, as long as I exist, I will never curse the ground because of humans, and I will never again destroy all living creatures by flood. And that's as far as he went. He didn't stop there. I think we know that at some point in time, there's going to be a flood of fire happening. And people who are not prepared for that are going to pay for it. Finally, God made a promise, and never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And he gave us a rainbow so that we could remember that promise. Now, if Noah's story is a made-up story, what impact does that have on your life? If it's just a story, does it have any impact on your life? It might make one question the Bible. There are people who would question the Bible because of the story of Noah, and they would laugh at you and say, you believe that ridiculous story? Or you might simply write off the first few chapters as a simple story to very simple truth. But if the Bible is true, how can we validate it? Well, God gave us science, the potential of knowledge to learn about the universe, and the more we learn, I guarantee you, the more you're going to be amazed at God and His Son Jesus and the Bible. You can reconcile scientific findings with the Bible, and that's a large part of another series that I wrote and I gave to the class that we had over in the other place, and I hope that we get to do that sometime. I'd love to give it to the children as well, you know, the ones who are beginning to go in the first biology class, for instance. Well, that's all the time that I have, and thankfully I got to let you go because I know everybody else is leaving, and so I don't have time for questions. If you do have any questions, though, come see me after class and we'll talk about it.